Welcome everyone to this public lecture being conducted by CCIR in collaboration with CBDC. Just today is Dr. Muth. It's a pleasure and honor. Just before we over to Karl, we're going to do a quick introduction of CCIR and quickly sort of introduce the public lecture. So at CCIR, what we're really going to do is build various kinds of bridges between academia and the wider public. To that general end, we have all sorts of events and opportunities, primarily for high school students, in some cases for undergraduates as well. I encourage you guys to go check out our website. I'll be plugging a link into the chat in just a second. We have all sorts of pretty exciting opportunities for especially high school students like yourselves who are interested, let's say, in exploring yourself intellectually and academically. We have things like these public lecture initiatives. We host sort of quarterly triennial events such as policy-thons, essay competitions, various kinds of workshops, as well as research symposiums. We encourage you guys to go explore our website a little bit, learn a little bit more about some of these opportunities. They're really, really great profile building opportunities. In addition to some of this work that we do at the level of building events, we also offer intensive online research mentorship programs, of which actually Karl is also a part of. At the Academy, what we're doing is we're offering these intensive, highly selective online research programs taught and designed by leading faculty such as Dr. Muth himself. At these programs, what we're really trying to do is offer courses and one-on-one mentorship opportunities that are really rigorous in terms of its academics and its missions, where you guys are going to be able to work with sort of peers who are as nerdy as yourself, as passionate about everything from quantum physics to business to cryptocurrency, as you yourself happens to be. And you get to work with leading faculty such as Dr. Muth. So that's all I really wanted to say about CCIR. Today, we're really here to learn a little bit more about Karl's work. And just before I hand things over to Dr. Muth, I want to give a quick introduction of his profile. So Dr. Muth is simultaneously holds appointments from the University of Chicago at the Booth Business School, as well as Northwestern University at the Pritzker School of Law. A full list of Dr. Muth's appointments and accolades would probably take way too much time. We'll probably be out of here by 10:30 if that's the plan. So here we're really just going to focus a little bit on Dr. Muth's expertise and background with respect to some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today, including finance and cryptocurrency. So Dr. Muth is a Dominican American who has taught, researched, and worked extensively at the intersections of law, economics, and business. Karl has master's with a concentration in economics at the University of Chicago, followed by master's and PhD degrees at the London School of Economics. After his doctoral studies, he was selected for the Emerging Leaders Program at Harvard. Karl became involved in cryptocurrency in 2014 and was chosen to lead a venture capital-backed fintech startup focused on crypto in 2017 as its CEO. Variants of that company's technology are now being used by leading hedge funds and trading desks around the world. Karl holds a variety of technical certifications related to blockchain systems, including the IBM Blockchain Developer Badge and the Conscience Academy Blockchain Foundation and Use Case Certification. Dr. Muth was also one of the first graduates of Cornell's Blockchain for Business program. He has spoken extensively on crypto topics at the World Economic Forum to key groups of policymakers in the United States, as well as teaching the first course material at Northwestern Law School on how to digitize contracts on Ethereum. So, as I mentioned, this is simply a fragment of all of Dr. Muth's myriad achievements and accolades and accomplishments. I'm sure you guys can learn a little bit more about his background and his profile as well later on in the Q&A. But for the time being, I am simply going to hand things over to Dr. Muth and say thank you so much for joining us today, and what a honor and pleasure to have you speak to us today. So, Dr. Muth, feel free to take it away.
Thanks so much for that kind introduction. Just to lay some ground rules, my hope today is to speak with you for a little over an hour and then to have some time for questions, because I know this is a topic where people may have questions, or they may say, hey, I'm very interested in this. How do I learn more? Or I'm interested in potentially having a career that somehow embraces these concepts or uses these technologies. How would I go about that? So I want to leave a little time for that kind of conversation. I actually think it's very important in crypto in particular to understand, how did people get involved in this space? So the Satoshi Nakamoto white paper in 2010 and the eCash white papers that preceded it in 2008 and 2009, there were very few of us actually studying and reading these papers. And I did not take Bitcoin very seriously until about 2013. I didn't purchase any Bitcoin until early 2014. So compared to some of my contemporaries in the space, I was a late arrival. Why was I so interested in crypto? To understand that, you have to understand the problem that crypto solves. And I don't mean that from a technical standpoint, though I did drop in the chat for those who are interested perhaps in technology and economics. I had a blog come out today that talks about, I've spent about the past month in Argentina because I wanted to get a sense of the currency crisis there. And one of the themes that I kept running into on the street was, well, yeah, I make my money at the local store that I work at. I make that money in Argentine pesos, and then I run to the Bitcoin ATM and I store that money in the form of Bitcoin. So some of you may have taken a course that might be Intro to Economics or Money in Banking, or some class like this, which is now offered at many top high schools. And in that course, you probably read either Hume's essay or Adam Smith's appendages to the Wealth of Nations, or maybe even Milton Friedman's 1970 essay on the topic of what is money. And it won't surprise you that economics professors like me and people who care about economics, one of the things that you end up asking yourself, and one of the things that early Bitcoin people in 2013, 2014 were asking themselves, is what is money? This is an extension of the question, is Bitcoin money? But it's also important to simply understand, well, what is money? What should we call money? If you're some tribe on an island somewhere, are seashells money? If that's in fact what you trade in. And so we've built tests over the years for what is money. Is it a store of value? Is it a unit of account? Is it something that can be used in a liquid sense to the extent that we define liquidity in economics? These are the kinds of things that we might think about when we test whether something is money. And for the first 2 years, decisively, Bitcoin was not money. There is a famous transaction, which in the crypto community is celebrated as Pizza Day, which is the first day where someone actually exchanged Bitcoin for 2 pizzas. And that event is historically important, not just because it's a funny small transaction to buy 2 pizzas. It's something we've all done. But it's something that demonstrates a tangible good being exchanged for Bitcoin in a relatively arm's length transaction where people agreed on a price for these 2 pizzas, and someone in fact did transfer Bitcoin and someone else did in fact deliver the 2 pizzas. They might say, wow, that doesn't sound like much of a use case for cryptocurrency. I'm perfectly fine pulling out my credit card and buying 2 pizzas or paying cash for 2 pizzas. There's nothing revolutionary about buying 2 pizzas. And you are absolutely right. What's special about that transaction isn't that it demonstrates that Bitcoin is special. It's that it demonstrates that Bitcoin might be money. Because Bitcoin in that transaction looks an awful lot like money. It's something that you trade to get the 2 pizzas. And all the other examples I gave, whether it's providing your credit card number or providing cash, those are also situations where we sort of accept that as money. Yes, you know that your credit card isn't cash, but you trust that you can sort of use it like money. And this is important conceptually in validating the role of Bitcoin and later other cryptocurrencies, whether they're ERC20 tokens on the Ethereum network, whether they're ERC777 NFTs that are being traded, or whether they're more complex token and contract types. As Oliver said, I have spent now 6 years at Northwestern's law school teaching how to code Ethereum contracts. I was the first person to teach Ethereum coding, I think, at any law school. And I've continued to work on that. And at the end of my remarks today, I'll tell you sort of what the current projects I'm working on are and what people are struggling to build now on crypto networks, because there are things that were challenging back in 2014 or 2015 that are relatively trivial today. On the flip side, there are things that we thought would be solved by now that really aren't solved yet. It's important to recognize that early in Bitcoin's history and early in crypto's history, there were real questions about network vulnerability that no longer exist today, I would say. Bitcoin mainnet main ledger has never been hacked. There have been exchanges with security vulnerabilities that have been compromised. But the main Bitcoin network has always been able, resiliently and with 100% accuracy, to defend itself against penetration attempts. Why is that important? Well, if I told you, hey, I'm going to store my money in this bank, but they occasionally leave the door to the bank unlocked, you would be skeptical about whether you should leave money in that bank. And that's exactly the burden that we have when we construct financial networks, whether they're crypto or traditional rails, payment rails and transfer rails are what we talk about with traditional institutions. Those are the digital rails that connect, for instance, banks to clearing agencies, FX desks to banks, and so forth. The analogous rails that are built using crypto software have to be at least as robust and hopefully more robust than the ones used for legacy banking. Now, how did I learn about this stuff? As Oliver mentioned, I don't have a strong technical background. I wrote a degree in economics. I have a law degree. My PhD is in applied economics and decision making. I'm not a MIT CS person. I didn't go to Stanford D School with Evan and the rest of those guys. Why do I know anything about this? Well, I took a deep interest in these basic technologies. And by basic technologies, I mean concepts of cryptography, concepts of applied mathematics, the softwareization of mathematics. I became very interested in these things at an early age. I started coding when I was about 9, originally in DBase 3, and then in Borland C, and then in C++, and I still write a fair amount of C++ and C# code today. And that paid off for me when I was a little kid coding in the late 80s. There weren't many little kids coding in the late 1980s. And I ended up writing a very, very early chatbot for a science fair in 1994 and winning a scholarship from people who were impressed by that chatbot software at the science fair, regional science fair, and the national science fair. And I won a college scholarship for that. So I would encourage you, if you're passionate about these things, don't hide in your parents' basement and work on these things alone. Show what you're working on to your friends, show it off at school, show it to people who can appreciate the technology. Think about how you might show what you've been doing in the context of college application or in the context of other situations where this might be a real asset that you can show an admissions committee that might make you different from someone else. Remember, everyone takes the SAT. Everyone who you're competing against gets a good score. So that's not going to be enough to make you special in the eyes of top universities. I've sat on the admissions committee at the University of Chicago since 2009. We have lots and lots of brilliant young people who want to study at the University of Chicago. You know what we also have? We have a parking lot where you're not allowed to park unless you have a Nobel Prize, the Nobel lot, because we have so many people who teach at U Chicago who have Nobel Prizes that they have their own parking lot. So if you want to study at a place like this, you've got to be special. You've got to stand out against other people. And one way it is to show up at lectures like this, to demonstrate that you're interested in more advanced concepts than your peers, to show that you've put in the work to get some skills. Maybe it's related to crypto, maybe it's related to economics, maybe it's related to history. Maybe you are fortunate enough to have learned more languages than your peers. These are all things that you can highlight as special achievements and interests that many of the people you're competing against won't have. So that's my mini rant I inserted here for that purpose. But think about it. You may think of these things as I did. When I started coding, it was just a fun thing. It was a hobby. It was cool. I was a not very athletic young person who could, maybe not do much on the soccer pitch, but could make this computer do whatever I wanted. And that was hugely thrilling. And that's what kept me interested in coding when I was a little kid. So think about those kinds of things. Now I want to interject something else that you will have encountered listening to music on Spotify or Amazon Music or wherever you get your music, but you may not know its history. When I was a teenager, when I was your age, there was something called Napster. And Napster was a software platform, a distributed software platform, where people could share music with each other without digital rights management. It was a non-DRM environment. So I have an MP3 of a song, I can share it with you, I can make a copy of it. Now a copy of it resides on your computer and my computer. That's how Napster worked. It was a music sharing platform in the very early days of the internet. As you might imagine, record labels did not like Napster because if I can just make a copy of a song and share it with you, the record label, the artist, all the other people, the lawyers, etc., don't make any money from that. I've just made a copy of this piece of property. Well, now you understand exactly the problem Bitcoin was designed to attack. This is what's called a double spend problem. So imagine that I have a US dollar bill. That US dollar bill has certain characteristics that try to make it hard for me to copy it. It's made out of a special paper, which is actually a kind of cloth made in a special factory in Iowa that's guarded by the Secret Service. The green ink used on the back side is very different from the black ink used on the front side. The green ink is slightly magnetic, but not too magnetic. So a Secret Service agent can very quickly ascertain whether it has the right level of magnetism. The specific gravity of the black ink is lower than water. The specific gravity of the green ink is heavier than water. And on top of all this, each bill has its own serial number. So even if I made perfect copies, let's say I make 1 million copies of this $1 bill, well, now there will be too many bills in circulation that have that identical number. Eventually, someone will notice. they'll have $2 bills and they'll have the same number and they'll say, wow, that's weird, right? But what if you wanted to police it from the very beginning? What if you wanted to make it impossible for anyone to even try to make a copy of that $1 bill, to even try to make a copy of that song and share it with their friends? That's what distributed rights management. Now, DRM is distributed rights management was the original phrase. It's been backronymed to mean what it means now. But DRM is such an important idea. It basically means that if you're connected to the internet has master databases called audit ledgers that check that the software in your Spotify account is actually songs that you have a right to listen to. This is, in some ways, similar to Bitcoin, but in one important way, different. Spotify's master ledger is centralized. Someone in Sweden is in charge of maintaining that ledger, making sure that it's robust against attack, making sure that it's at 100% uptime, making sure that its global performance is similar. So if you want to listen to a song in London or in Tokyo, you have similar performance from the database. These are hard problems to solve, but they aren't as hard to solve as the problem that Bitcoin solves. Bitcoin, every computer mining Bitcoin or running Bitcoin, as some say, every computer has access to a copy of the master ledger. What that means is you can't go and destroy some computer in Sweden. You can't, as they do in this final scene of the film Fight Club, you can't just blow up a bunch of buildings that are bank buildings and now no one remembers that you had a lot of credit card debt the day before. That isn't how distributed ledgers work. There's actually a copy of the ledger on every computer that runs Bitcoin. And because of that, the network is tremendously robust. It's a distributed node network. And the ledgers themselves are tamper-proof. Now, how do they achieve that? Well, I won't go into too much detail, but everyone on this call who's serious about this, who owns any Bitcoin, who has ever thought of operating in this space, should go read the Satoshi Nakamoto Bitcoin white paper. There's no excuse to not read this document. In my view, it is, if you told me you get to assign 10 documents to everyone on Earth, right after the US Constitution would be the Nakamoto white paper on my list of important things to read, because there are so many IQ points contained in this document, and it's 9 pages long. So there's no one in the world who can tell me that they just didn't have time to read a 9-page document. And if you read it and really understand it, I guarantee you, you will walk away from that document feeling smarter. So what Bitcoin does is when there's a transaction, and I want to be very clear, a transaction in this context doesn't mean buying 2 pizzas. It means anytime value moves around the network. Even when a person has 2 Bitcoin wallets and moves a Bitcoin from wallet A to wallet B, even though the person controls both wallets, we count that as a transaction. So any reallocation of value on the network, we're going to call a transaction. Those transactions get stacked one on top of another, just like in the double entry accounting that the Italians invented in the early 1500s in a ledger. Those are stacked and sleeved until there are enough of them to become a block. Now, if you want to visualize this, if you're a visual learner like I am, and you want to visualize these blocks, don't think of them as Legos. Think of them as a block of solid metal with a key sticking out from either end. And that key has to fit into each block. The block before it, it has to fit perfectly. And the block after it, it has to fit perfectly. So think of these blocks as existing on a timeline that can be theoretically infinite in length. But each block fits perfectly with the block before and after it, and just as important, does not fit any other block. Okay, why is this so important? Because tamper-proof and audit compliant are two key characteristics of any financial ledger. You don't want people to be able to go back and change numbers and lie and say, hey, I sent you 10 Bitcoin last week when really you only sent 1, right? That's tamper resistance. That's what we're talking about conceptually there. But you also don't want people to not be able to look back and figure out what happened. That's audit compliance. That's the idea that you should be able to look at a ledger retrospectively and figure out what happened in the past. Oh yeah, Karl paid Oliver 1 Bitcoin, not 10 Bitcoin, 1 Bitcoin. It's right here in the ledger. So that's very important. Without that, you may have a robust ledger from a security standpoint, but it's not a usable ledger because no one will trust the numbers in it. So why is this so hard? Is the math hard? Is the software hard? What part of it is difficult? Why did it take humans, a relatively smart species, why did it take us until 2010 to develop this? Well, the answer is we tried for a really long time. In the late 1990s, people thought they'd invented an electronic value equivalent called eCash. And eCash was like Bitcoin, but not as good, and had certain vulnerabilities. And one of the vulnerabilities was that in an eCash ledger, you could quarantine and air gap the ledger, meaning you could run it on a standalone offline computer and tamper with the ledger, and then get online and infect other parts of the network with your incorrect ledger. Bitcoin resists this through what's called caucus control and consensus. Caucus control is the right way to visualize this, I think, is that when your computer gets on the internet, it's like on the playground and it's surrounded by a few bullies on the playground. And these bullies are other computers on the network who already agree with each other. They already agree that Karl sent Oliver 1 Bitcoin and not 10 Bitcoin. So if you tell the bullies, hey, I sent 10 Bitcoin, they're going to look at you and say, no, we're running at 100% uptime. We've co-witnessed every transaction on the network, and we only saw 1 Bitcoin move from Karl to Oliver. You have a chance now, this is called caucus reset, you have a chance now to tell the Bitcoin network the truth. And if you still say 10 Bitcoin when the truth is 1 Bitcoin, you will start being a poor reputation node on the network. The network will start distrusting what you are telling it and will instead rely on the consensus of other nodes. This is like an immune system for the ledger. It protects the ledger from contamination with false information. It also protects against an offline air gap attack where someone might take some nodes offline, tamper with the ledger contents, reintroduce them to the network, and now you have bad information flowing on the network. Because there is such a massive population of trusted Bitcoin nodes that have always told the truth, these newcomer lying nodes will never succeed over the truthful caucus of many nodes that have been online the whole time. I remember winning a hacking competition when I was in my teen years that is sort of related to this concept. And it's important whenever you encounter something in technology to ask yourself why it's designed the way it is. Also, it's important to critique the designs you see. They may not be the best design, but if it's a piece of technology, someone designed it. And that person designed it a certain way for a certain reason. So I'll give you an example. There was a prize that I won when I was a teenager that was to figure out these 25 character codes that came with Microsoft products. So when you installed a Microsoft product, it would ask you for a 25 character code. And you'd have to enter this code in order to install the software. Again, this is a kind of digital rights management. They didn't want you to just be able to copy the CD and now have 100 copies of Microsoft Office that you could give your friends. How did they control this? Well, the computer went online and saw if the code had already been used. If it had already been used, it didn't let you use that code again. Well, that's interesting. So I thought, I was maybe 15 at the time. I thought, well, let's think about how Microsoft designed this system to prevent double spend, because we're talking about Bitcoin today, which basically the core problem is double spend. And similar to double spend is making unlimited copies of a music album or unlimited copies of a CD of software. These are all related problems. So let's think through this problem together. When you make a CD or a DVD, it doesn't matter. When you make them in any significant quantity, you press them, you don't burn them. So you might burn a few DVDs to distribute to your friends. But if you need to make 1 million copies of Microsoft Office, you hire someone, usually in Taiwan, to run a big pressing run. And they physically have a stamping die and they press CDs. And every CD comes out the other end basically the same. Not perfectly the same, because CD-ROM has a 2% fault tolerance, etc. But they're very, very similar to each other. I said, well, I know how CDs are made. They're made on these pressing runs. And every CD is basically the same. And it would cost way too much for Microsoft to have a special code for each CD. There's no way that's how they do it. So I sat around, I was 15. I didn't have a driver's license yet. There was nothing to do other than solve this math problem. We've already established I wasn't a very good soccer player. So I'm sitting around in my room and I'm trying to sort of figure out the underlying math. I said, no, every CD is the same. What do we know? Every CD is the same, but every package has a different code printed on it. Isn't that interesting? That means every code must work with every CD. It also means that each one CD must be vulnerable to a lot of different codes being entered. But once you go online, Microsoft detects the code you used and it can only be entered once. So how would we attack this program? And I eventually figured it out. It's very simple. It's a integer Caesar cipher, basically. So a Caesar cipher, by the way, is a very early kind of cryptography used by the Roman emperors, where you just take every letter and you move it once in the alphabet. So A becomes B, B becomes C, and so on. In the classic science fiction film 2001, A Space Odyssey, which everyone should see, the computer is named HAL. And he's named HAL because HAL is IBM with the numbers moved back one in the alphabet. So I becomes H, B becomes A, and you get HAL instead of IBM, because IBM wouldn't let them use their trademark in the film as the maker of the computer. So setting aside science fiction for a second, though, this is going to sound a lot like science fiction. What you do is you buy a couple of these Microsoft codes off your friends and you start comparing them. And you do some math, pretty basic math. I mean, remember, I'm 15 at this point. I don't have a PhD in economics or econometrics at this point in my life. And you say, well, what if each of these letters was worth a number? What if M is worth 2 and N is worth 8 and B is worth 5? And eventually I figured out that the way this Microsoft code worked, at least at the time, was Each letter was worth a number, and numbers were worth the absolute value of them flipped, or 10 minus the number. These are all single digit numbers. And if you added up all the 25 values, it had to be divisible by 7. If the sum of all of the numbers was divisible by 7 cleanly with no remainder, then it was a valid code. If that wasn't true, then the CD had the logic necessary to reject the code, even if it wasn't connected to the internet. Because this was another confusing thing about the system. Somehow it worked even when the computer wasn't on the internet. So you knew that it wasn't dialing Microsoft and asking, hey, is this code valid? There was some way for it mathematically to figure out whether a given code was valid or not. So I figured that out. I won this Microsoft hacking competition as a result of that, and became just very, very interested in this class of problems, sort of distributed computing problems, distributed confirmation, hidden and two-phase cryptography, private key cryptography. Started reading important papers on that. There's a great DARPA paper in 1989 on private key cryptography. I had a copy of it printed on my nightstand in high school. Taught myself a lot of the math needed for it. So again, be curious about these kinds of things. There's nothing that says that the order in which school tells you to learn things is the correct order. If you're curious about something, go off and learn it. If you haven't learned the needed mathematics yet, go to the library, get a book on mathematics, teach yourself the mathematics. You are smarter than most people who are running around, who've already learned calculus, who've already learned statistics. These things are not magic wizard abilities. These are just basic things that if you commit the time, if you are disciplined about studying it, you can learn anything. This is one of the joys of having a human brain. You can run around learning whatever you like. I encourage you to do that early and often. Now that you understand something about distributed security, let's go back to Bitcoin. So as Oliver mentioned, I worked as CEO of a venture-backed crypto startup, and that was great experience. I got to work with a wonderful technical team. I already had exposure to crypto at this point. I had purchased crypto at this point. I had been a Thiel Fellows mentor working for Peter Thiel when Vitalik Buterin was one of our Thiel Fellows who founded Ethereum. So I had seen how people build crypto networks, crypto infrastructure, what a good proposal looked like, what kinds of people had the right skills to compete credibly in this space, to build important software in the space, which Vitalik is certainly one of those people, even though he's largely self-taught. I still consider him one of the most brilliant people in the space. And he proposed building the Ethereum network when he was 17 years old. So this is not something that you need 20 years of computer experience to do. This is something that crypto is driven by ideas, not credentials. So if you have a bright idea, go and explore it. The future of crypto, in my view, really breaks into 3 categories. So there's a future of Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's value, in my opinion, comes from a very unusual characteristic that I don't know if it will be true in the future, but it's certainly one of the things that I became fascinated with early in Bitcoin's history. And that is, if I think about a quadrant analysis, some of you may not know what a quadrant analysis is. It's the arbitrary taxonomy that's often used in genetics, epidemiology, other areas of medicine and chemistry, to divide different concepts or different solutions, different genetics into buckets that have certain characteristics so that you can analyze them more closely. This has been borrowed by finance and economics, and quadrant analysis is something you'll often see nowadays in the hands of financial consultants, people doing investment banking, etc. That's a nice way to divide a data set among different characteristics that you might ascribe to that data set. Now, why should you care at all about this? Well, let me show you. I'm going to share my screen briefly, and I'll show you why thinking in taxonomies is so important. So let's look, Oliver, if you don't mind, I'm just going to do a quick screen share to PowerPoint here. So here's a basic 2x2 taxonomy, and we've used arbitrary axes. So the x-axis here is the anticipated potential for, let's call it venture capital class returns. You might get 50 times your money back if this is a good investment. Not just 5 times your money back, but 50 times your money back. And the y-axis is the anticipated liquidity at a given time. Now, the right way to think about this is, if I invest in this thing, how quickly can I turn it back into cash? Right? So I could buy a car, and it's sort of a hassle to sell a car. So I could buy a car, maybe it's a good investment, maybe the car goes up in value. But if at 1 a.m. on a Sunday, I decide I don't want to own that car anymore, there's nowhere I can log in online and sell that car in 30 seconds. It's relatively far from liquidity, is what we would say in economics. Its liquidity distance is high. So you'll notice what's in the upper right of this chart, Bitcoin. And it's the only asset, I think, ever in human history that is in the upper right corner of this chart. Bitcoin is an asset that, at least as of 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, this is an asset where you can get venture class returns potentially, and you can buy and sell the asset essentially at any given time in the middle of the night. Bitcoin network doesn't care what time of day it is. Bitcoin network doesn't care whether it's a weekend. Bitcoin network doesn't care whether your local bank is open or whether your local bank's ATM is broken right now. The network is totally indifferent. And that is one of the great powers of Bitcoin, is this idea of constant liquidity combined with the potential for very high returns. So I wanted to highlight that. What do I mean by very high returns? Well, 5 times your money is a pretty good return, depending on the timeline. $20,000 Bitcoin has been the norm for the last period. We were up into the high 20s. We were into the teens for a while. But 20,000 US for a Bitcoin in recent history has been sort of a benchmark that people pay attention to. How long ago would you have had to invest in Bitcoin to make 5 times your money? Well, in mid-March of 2020, you could buy Bitcoin for $4,000 US. So the answer is, if you had purchased Bitcoin in mid-2020 and sold, mid-March of 2020, and sold when there was $20,000 Bitcoin, which there has been often in the past year, you would have made 5 times your money. And there have been periods not long ago where Bitcoin was worth $60,000, and then you would have made much more. So I'm not here to tell you or not tell you to speculate by buying cryptocurrencies. What I'm here to tell you is that if you were to hold one of these assets and then you wanted to sell it, your desire to sell it is able to be acted on immediately. In highly liquid markets, if I put up a Bitcoin for sale right now um, at the market rate, someone will take that order in probably milliseconds or tens of milliseconds. So in less than a second, appreciably less than a second, you can buy or sell these assets through any number of trusted major exchanges. That's just dramatically different from investing in real estate or a bar of gold or some other asset that is actually going to be quite difficult to rebroker. So finally, I said I would, we're coming up on the hour and I want to wrap up my thoughts and let people ask questions and maybe let Oliver facilitate some questions. So my current project is working in the Caribbean on a series of the crypto insurance projects. And these projects are designed to use oracles. Oracles are a kind of sensor or indicator that interacts with the network. I'll explain that in more detail in a second. We use oracles to automatically trigger insurance payouts. And this is a case of theoretical work I did way back when I was a grad student becoming relevant again. So when I was a graduate student at the London School of Economics, I spent 2.5 years living in rural Uganda and studying the agriculture industry. Equatorial Uganda is enormously fertile. There are 22 crops that grow there well enough to be commercial grade. So it's a rare place where you can grow soybeans at commercial scale, but you can also grow coffee at commercial scale. You can grow tobacco at commercial scale. It is a uniquely fertile place on Earth. And you might imagine there are not paved roads. There are sometimes dirt airstrips. It's a hard place to get around. So imagine after a drought, having to drive around every Ugandan farm and appraise whether they should be paid their agricultural insurance for their crop failure during a drought. Well, if you're the insurance company, you'd lose all your money just driving people around appraising the damage. Just be too costly. So I was brought in, I hadn't even earned my PhD yet. I was working for Grameen, which is a bank based in Bangladesh that won a Nobel Prize. And you should read up on Grameen if you're interested in interesting finance models. But I worked for them as a country level economist and then a region level economist. And I designed the parametric insurance policy that we were going to implement. What is parametric insurance? Well, it's the easiest way for me to teach you what an oracle is in the crypto network. So in a network like Ethereum, you can write a contract that says, a simple contract might say, no earlier than September 25th, I will pay Oliver 1 ETH unit on the Ethereum network. And that contract, once it's active on the network, will constantly check, hey, is it September 25th yet? Hey, is it September 25th yet? It will ask the date oracle, which is part of the network. The date oracle is a confirmed exact time and date. You can always ask it, hey, what time it is? What time is it right now? And it will always tell you the right answer. So this little contract just runs all over the network. Hey, what time is it? What time is it? And eventually when one of the confirmed oracles says, hey, it's September 25th, then this contract has the authority to go into my wallet and take 1 ETH and go into Oliver's wallet and put the 1 ETH into his wallet. That's how that contract is going to behave. Now imagine instead of something simple like telling you what time it is, imagine you had a more complex oracle, and that's what we're building in the Caribbean. The oracle in this case is a set of windmills on different islands, and they constantly record the wind speed at those locations. And we know from not just atmospheric research and theoretical models, but we know from actual empirical damage models, we know that when the wind gets to a certain speed, that's a hurricane or near hurricane force winds, and there's going to be damage nearby where that windmill is. So we have a set of Ethereum contracts that say, hey, if the wind speed at this oracle on the edge of the island of St. Kitts ever reaches this speed, then we're going to pay the surrounding people this amount of money as part of an insurance claim. Because we're pretty sure, we aren't 100% sure, but we're pretty sure that if the wind is that fast for any sustained period of time, there's going to be major damage to the buildings nearby. And what's so funny to me is I happened to get involved in this project when years and years ago as a graduate student, I designed almost exactly the same system, except in Uganda with rain gauges. So we didn't call them oracles because it wasn't a crypto caucus confirmed network, but we had trusted rain gauges that were hidden up in water towers around different villages. And instead of having to go to every farm and see if there was drought damage, instead we had good data that, hey, if there isn't at least this much rain, the soybean crops are going to fail. So you just had to look at your ledger of insurance customers. Hey, who's growing soybeans? Oh, these people are growing soybeans. How much rain did we get? Not enough for soybeans to succeed. Great, let's pay them their insurance and get out of here. We don't even need to visit the farm because we have good enough data. We can do the basic math and figure out, oh yeah, well, tobacco is more drought resistant. This has been enough rain for tobacco. We aren't going to pay the tobacco farmers their claims. It's not enough rain for soybeans. So let's pay the soybean people. And if you think of how much simpler that is than visiting 30,000 farms individually and taking photos and figuring out whether the crops failed, it's a huge difference. So I'm working on that. That's one of the biggest projects, insurance and financial services projects on Ethereum right now. I also teach Ethereum and Cardano and Solana network coding at the University of Chicago. I teach workshops at Northwestern as well on contract coding, network coding, so-called self-directed, which really means automated contracts that are in effect for long periods of time. I'm working with colleagues at Stanford Law School and Northwestern Law School and the law school at Georgetown Law Center on what we call dead man switch contracts. So this is a contract that would reach out to you, say, every 3 months and say, hey, Oliver, are you still alive? If so, enter these 2 codes. And if you failed to do that, let's say 3 times, then it would be authorized to move your Ethereum to a safe place, to assume that you're dead, to carry out the wishes in your will, to give your kids certain amounts of Ethereum or access to certain wallets, or to wait until your kid is 21 and then do these things. So this idea of digitized and automated estate planning, I think, is very interesting. Building the fundamental oracle of whether someone's alive or dead is hard to do. You can come up with fake death certificates. There's a lot of potential for fraud. Our system relies mostly on asking the person a series of questions and codes that only that person would know, which even if they die and someone else gains access to their email, let's say it's an email confirmation, that person probably doesn't have access to their email and access to these codes or passphrases, etc. So that's some of the stuff I'm working on that I'm excited about. As I said, Bitcoin as a store of value is a controversial thing among economists. I put in the chat my blog about Argentina, which published today. I talk a little bit in there about why people in Argentina store their money in Bitcoin. But there are many other cases of this in El Salvador and Venezuela, and even in Uganda, which I mentioned earlier. The Ugandan shilling is highly volatile, and it's another market where people have been storing money in Bitcoin. So I'll stop there. And Oliver, thoughts on how we should use this remaining time?
Let's open up the floor for question and answers. So I think with this group, so first off, I actually should say thank you, Karl, for that talk. That was I at least learned a lot. I definitely know that I need to go read that white paper. You've convinced me of that much. But I think let's just open up the floor for some questions. Students are welcome to raise your hands in using the raise your hand function, type questions into the chat, but I think it might be better if you guys simply sort of raise your hands and unmuted yourself, so there's a little bit more interaction and it's not just like, us reading questions from the chat box. But yeah, so the floor is now open. We are welcoming of any questions that you guys might have for Karl. If you guys are feeling shy, we'll let you guys use the chat box, but I would encourage you guys to raise your hands.
And you can ask me about, doesn't have to be about crypto. It could be more generally about technology or how to get involved in, newer areas of technology, or, maybe you're going to college in a year or two and you're wondering, if I study this, is this helpful to get involved in these spaces, or what should you be reading? There are lots of questions like that I think are totally valid and, more tangentially related to what we're talking about.
So if maybe as the students are warming up, I can
break the ice, Oliver.
Break the ice a little bit. So one thing I was thinking about during your talk, Karl, was how different of a structure of trust crypto seems to introduce into sort of our financial and economic systems. I wonder if you have anything to say about that, of the way in which these sorts of changing technologies affect foundational practices in the way we understand how to trust financial institutions and things like that.
So the ideal, of course, is a totally trustless network. The ideal would be a network where you can participate and you don't have to know anything about the person you're dealing with. An example of this, probably everyone but me present is too young to remember this, but there was a time when PayPal was part of eBay. And PayPal was an attempt in an environment where people didn't know and trust each other to provide a transaction layer that was low trust. Not trustless, but low trust. What do I mean by low trust? I mean, you go on eBay and you find a car that you like and you bid in an auction, you win the auction. Wow, you're excited about the car, but you aren't so excited about sending all this money to someone that you met on the internet on eBay. You've never met this person. You've never even seen the car in person. Who knows? Does the car even exist? Are you just going to send money to this person and they turn out to be imaginary? Maybe it's a scam. Maybe the pictures are of a car that this person doesn't even have in their possession. There are all sorts of imaginable problems, right? Well, PayPal was meant to be two things: a low trust exchanger of value. That was number one thing. And then also an insurer of valid transactions. In other words, PayPal would, on behalf of eBay, actually guarantee and indemnify that you were going to get something for your money. And if it turned out that that car ad was a scam, they would get you your money back. How important was this to the success of eBay? Hugely, because in the early days of eBay, people didn't just not trust eBay, they didn't trust the internet. This was the mid 1990s. So people were like, wow, I'm going to go on my computer, I'm going to enter my credit card number, and I'm going to, do all of these types of things with people that I don't know. This seems very scary. And PayPal helped put people at ease. Now, the goal with crypto is to have even lower trust than PayPal. In a crypto environment, you don't even have to know someone's name. In fact, most people that I transact with, I don't know their real name. I don't know what country they're in. I might contribute dollars or British pounds and turn them into Bitcoin and then do transactions in Bitcoin. But I have no idea the person I'm buying and selling with might instead turn their Bitcoin into euro or Japanese yen. I know nothing about these people, and that's totally fine because I don't need to know anything about them to transact with them. And that's very, very close to being actually zero trust. So all I have to trust is the Bitcoin network, and all they have to trust is the network. They don't have to trust me. I could be a terrible, fraudulent, fraudster, Madoff type of person. It doesn't matter because the network is reliable. And so one of the big central design specifications of these networks is to get the network to be so trustworthy that it sort of doesn't matter who you're doing business with. And that's a very compelling idea. We have some questions. Do you have the topic about history in this year?
Yeah.
I don't understand the question.
Yeah, Jingying, if you don't mind sort of just rephrasing that question a little, or maybe unmuting yourself and quickly just elaborating, that'd be super helpful.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
I want to know the topic about the CCIR's the topic. Do you have the topic in history?
I actually don't teach history, but I do teach a history of law class at Northwestern. I haven't taught it for a little while. But I have a deep interest in history, and I think any of these topics, you should, if you're serious about a topic, you should learn its history.
Yeah.
I'm writing I just had a book come out September 1st. I guess I can hype my book. It's called Self-Inflicted, and it talks about history. It talks about how we got here. It talks about sort of the societal policy discussion around suicide. And why is suicide something that, it's been talked about in philosophy since the beginning of philosophy? Arguably, it's one of the core questions in philosophy. Why are we alive? And should we have the ability to choose whether we're alive or end our lives? My next book is on the Spanish game in chess, E4, E5, NF3, and the life of Ruy Lopez, the priest who probably contributed the most to that chess opening. Well, how am I writing that book? Well, I'm spending 3 months in Spain and visiting the tower where Ruy Lopez lived, and I've visited the 3 piazzas where he played chess in Italy when he did his pilgrimage to Rome and played in the Open near the Vatican. And so learning the history of something allows you to access the material at a much deeper level. So same with Bitcoin. The start of Bitcoin is the white paper. Read the 2009, 2010 Satoshi Nakamoto white paper. That's the start of history. It's such a lucky area, right? How many important areas of study are there only 13 years of history? If you want to study the history of chess and you want to do it seriously, you have to go to Eastern Indo-Mesopotamia and the migration of chess from modern day Iran to modern day Syria and people playing in the market in Damascus. That was the start. That was when the first chess openings, modern chess openings, were created. Okay, now you have to study a 2,500-year history. So if you're interested in crypto, it's a 13-year history. You can learn all of it. You could study it for a few weeks and have a good understanding of the whole history. So I encourage you to do that. Let's get to Alice Lee, who has a question. Why is there a market for these things? Great question. So my joke about markets references when Ford won Le Mans, the famous 24-hour car race in France, and a German journalist from Das Auto came from Munich to report on Le Mans. He didn't know much about Ford. Ford in Europe was thought of as a not very good American car manufacturer. And so he quite innocently asked the question, when did Ford get into racing? And Henry Ford Jr. looked at him and said, we started racing as soon as we were done building the second car. That's how markets work. If you're alone on a desert island, you don't have many choices to make. Your main choice is which coconut should I have for breakfast. But as soon as there are two people on the island, now there's a market. Markets are how people interact. Markets are how people exchange information. And when you see volatile markets like crypto markets, it means that people think they have different information. Okay, if I'm willing to pay $25,000 for Bitcoin and someone else is only willing to pay $15,000, we must believe different information. We've both arrived at that conclusion. We've come to some price, but the contributors to that price, I say this as an economist, I think most economists would agree with this, prices integrate information. So if I fundamentally believe Bitcoin's worth much less than you think it's worth, we're either exposed to different information, it's an access problem, or we believe different information, it's a credibility problem. So why do markets exist in these things? It's because there are disagreements over what these things are worth. Anytime you have disagreements about value, you're going to have markets. Why do people bet at the horse racing track? Because some people think, oh, before the race, I looked at that horse. He looks really healthy today. He looks like he's going to run really fast. Someone else saw a different horse and has those same beliefs about the other horse. And so they're willing to make a bet against each other over which horse is going to run faster that day. This is how markets are built. All markets in the world are either auction markets or wager markets. Those are the only kinds of, in 5,000 years, these are the only two kinds of markets humans have been able to invent. It's either a wager, also called an option market, where you think there's some output that you can predict and you're willing to enter into a contract to place that bet. I think oil is going to hit $100 a barrel this year, is exactly the same as I think this horse is going to win the race. Those are just wager and option markets. The other case is an auction market. We have a thing, we have certain rules. There are all kinds of different rules. If you're interested in auction rules, read the work of Robert Gertner. He was my PhD co-supervisor, brilliant person at designing auctions, helped design the FCC Spectrum auction in the 80s, which is how the modern communication system of the US was built. In an auction market, we all agree what the thing is. I'm selling this house. And then we bid against each other. And someone thinks it's worth more than everyone else, and that person wins the auction. That's how auction markets work. Those of you who watched the start of the NFT period in crypto, it began with a series of auctions. I own a very early crypto cat. And why? Because I have a cat and I think cats are cute. And I thought this purple cat was cuter than other people did. And so I was willing to pay a couple ETH for it. That's how auction markets work. They may be irrational. Cat cuteness might not be measurable empirically. But people are willing to bid against each other in these markets. Jane has two questions to ask, but didn't ask either of them. Jane, why don't you at least put one of them in the text box?
Hello, sir. I
No
wish
problem.
to unmute myself and just communicate with you directly.
Great.
Uh,
And then
so
we'll
I have
turn
two
to Hannah,
questions, and
who's
the first one
patiently had
is,
her virtual hand up. But go ahead, Jane, and then we'll turn to Luke.
okay, sure. So first one, I wish to know, what do you think about the issue of perhaps money laundering that the anonymous crypto system might have generated?
So I've worked first of all, crypto is not any more anonymous than cash is. In
Oh.
many ways, it's much less anonymous. And there are very successful companies like Elliptic that have done huge amounts of forensic accounting work to figure out which wallets belong to which people. I have no doubt that companies like Elliptic and like Chainalysis can probably name almost all of my crypto wallet addresses. They might not know about certain hard wallets or offline addresses, but any wallets I've actually transacted in, I bet they can associate with me. You might say, well, what about like tumblers and what about mixers? These things can help anonymize transactions. But your core question, I think, is, does it bother me that crypto is sometimes used for cross-border illicit payments or illegal activities? And I think the fundamental answer is no, it doesn't bother me at all. We live in a world where over 95% of US $100 bills have at least trace amounts of cocaine on them. The idea that cash is an innocent way to transact, but crypto is a illicit or questionable way to transact is somewhat humorous to me. And of course, the robust, centuries-old mainstream financial system is used for fraud all the time. I was just an expert witness in a $1 billion fraud trial. I was a 702 expert witness in the Northern District of Illinois, which is our federal court here in Chicago. There was no crypto involved in that case. This was a young man who went to Northwestern, it happened, and was alleged to have defrauded $1.1 billion from normal people, normal investors. So the idea that criminal activity or fraudulent activity is isolated to or special in the crypto context, I have trouble believing. Jane, do you have a quick second follow-up question? Otherwise, we're going to rotate to Hannah.
Okay, I have one. So is it possible that crypto system cooperate with traditional banking systems someday so that they can compensate each other? And yeah, hopefully.
Yes, and those payment rails are already being built. In some cases, they're already integrated. The three projects that I think are furthest along are the relationship between TaxBit and Square, which allows you to move from the Square network, which is a more conventional, traditional payment network, to crypto and back again. And the partnership that they have with TaxBit allows you to do that without having weird tax effects or having to file a very complex tax return. Because many people are going to want to move small amounts between dollar and crypto, and they don't want to be hassling with hours and hours of accounting at the end of the year to figure out, oh, I paid that guy back for dinner in crypto, and I, shared in this trip for spring break in cash, and people shouldn't be burdened by that kind of reconciliation accounting. So that's what Square is doing. On the commercial side, I think TrueLayer is a very interesting company. TrueLayer. I'm not an investor in either of these companies in the spirit of full disclosure. But I think what TrueLayer is doing is interesting. They're building payment rails between banks and crypto wallets that are relatively high performance. So One problem has been that like the SWIFT network of banks is much faster than the Bitcoin network. Bitcoin Lightning tries to solve this, doesn't completely solve this. It does allow us to wedge many more Bitcoin transactions in an hour worth of blocks than would otherwise be possible. But people are attacking that problem. And then lastly, I think there are a lot of huge advances being made, particularly in South Korea, around the integration of mobile payments and crypto. So South Korea has one of the largest volumes of low value, high frequency mobile payments. So you walk around Seoul or any large city in South Korea, you'll see people, tapping their phones on vending machines and subway kiosks, and many of these transactions are like $1. You're riding in the subway for a few stops, or you're buying a Coca-Cola from the vending machine. And so we need some way to handle these small, high frequency, but low value transactions. And a lot of people are working on that. This is not this microtransaction environment is not an area that crypto was really designed around. Most crypto networks, I'll say, were not really designed around low value transfer, high frequency use cases. So that's also an area of innovation and engineering right now. Hannah?
I was wondering for like people that, for example, owns cryptocurrency companies and ones that are like actively using those currencies, are they actively trying to make this kind of digital currency more accessible to the general public? Because I feel like, I don't know if it's like the nature of the good, or maybe it's government regulation or other stuff, because I just don't feel like cryptocurrency is that accessible to people that may be like slightly interested in it. Because like a while back, one of my teachers suggested to me that maybe I could try investing in some cryptocurrencies, but I got a bit, I eventually lost interest because it just seems a bit complicated and a bit hard to start with like you have to figure out all the crypto wallets and all the different like currencies that they have available. It just doesn't seem like something that you can just quickly jump on an app and like start doing.
So depending what jurisdiction you're in, the number of crypto on-ramps varies widely. In the US, you can probably download Coinbase and buy a Bitcoin all within 5 minutes. In an intermediary wallet environment, like the government of Vietnam requires you to use, probably takes you 2 hours to really set up a wallet and use it properly. So there's huge variation from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Part of that is regulatory scrutiny, which is one of the things that you flagged in your question. I think what you're asking, though, fundamentally is something that in crypto we call the coffee question. And I might be in the minority on this, actually. The question is basically, should we care if people ever buy a cup of coffee using Bitcoin? And my answer is no, I don't care. I also don't care whether everyday people ever use crypto. Why don't I care? Shouldn't I care? No, because most everyday people drive around in cars, but they've never logged into the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and bought a barrel of oil and then resold it to a refinery in South Sudan, and then purchased a pro rata share of an oil tanker. And no, they just go to the local gas station and they fill up their car. They have no idea how oil markets work. They have no idea how to trade oil. They have no idea what the price of oil is. They might know the price of gasoline, which is one refined light sweet crude product. But they have no idea how the oil market works. They have no idea where oil comes from. They probably don't even know it comes out of the ground. And they're just fine. All they want to do is drive to work. And that's how crypto is going to be. There's going to be a group of us who understand where the oil comes from, who understand how it gets refined, who understand how oil in North Sudan transits to South Sudan, goes into a refinery, goes to the Horn of Africa, goes through the Suez Canal, ends up at your local gas station. A few of us are going to understand that. Most people are going to have no clue and no interest. And as long as their Netflix works properly and they can be sedated when they get home from work, they aren't going to care about learning about anything, because that's how most people are. And that's totally fine. But for those of us who want to actually understand how the world works, this stuff matters. Do I ever think most people will understand the layer of crypto that even you are talking about, wallets and wallet addresses, setup, seed phrase? No. In 5 years, all of that will be as strange as understanding that you have an Apple computer with an M1 chip and it has 3 layers of discrete cache. And what does it optimize storing in level 2 cache versus level 3 cache? People don't care. They just want their computer to start in the morning. So these technical layers, do I think people will ever interact with them, everyday people? No. And honestly, everyday people shouldn't be trusted to interact with these things. I live in Chicago. 100% of our power in Chicago is zero carbon. It comes from the Zion nuclear plant. What percentage of people who live in Chicago can explain to you how the multi-phase control rod system of the Zion nuclear plant keeps us safe while generating megawatts and megawatts of electricity? Very, very few people. Probably even physics students at the University of Chicago would have trouble telling you how the basics of a fission reactor work. Even though we're the only university in history to have a nuclear disaster on our campus, the Pile 1 reactor at the University of Chicago went supercritical and exploded. And still, many of our students have no idea how a nuclear reactor works. It drives me nuts, but people just don't take an interest in how things work. So the fact that you're here on a Friday, willing to learn about how things work, I appreciate that. And I think you're already 10 steps ahead of other people just taking interest in how things work and learning about new things. Luke wants to know what to do in high school if you're aiming for econ. The answer is, and I hate destination answers like this, but in this case, it's the correct one, I think, which is go look up a college curriculum from the type of college you plan to attend and look for a math course called Real Analysis and figure out what you would need to learn between what you know now in math and what you would need to know to take that class, Real Analysis. Because econ, and we can argue about this all day, I don't think it's entirely fair, but at a serious econ program like we have at U Chicago, no one's going to take you seriously until you've taken Real Analysis. So how would I prepare for that? Well, if your school offers AP Statistics and BC Calculus, you should take both. If you have the opportunity to take an advanced seminar in some type of quantitative analytics, you should take that class. Why? You'll learn something more advanced than basic calculus. The class will probably be taught in Python, so it will help your coding skills. And you may have the opportunity to do large data set analysis, which if you major in econ, one of the main things undergraduates struggle with is they've never worked with large data sets before. So they arrive and you give them a data set that has 20,000 or 50,000 entries, and they have no idea how to stack and clean that data set to work with it properly. If you can learn those basic skills, those preparatory skills, you'll be way ahead of your peers. And you'll be able to engage with the econ material at a much deeper level. So that's my advice. Recommended books for Introduction to Finance. Wow, there are so many. I don't think I'm the best one to give this advice. I would suggest that you look at the George Mason University Econ blog, which is maintained by my friend Tyler Cowan. And there are often Tyler and Alex, the main blog is Marginal Revolution, maintained by Tyler and Alex. And they often have very, very good book recommendations, including for undergraduates and people who want to get involved in econ and finance. They're much more up on this. They write book reviews on every new book that comes out and things like this. I'm not as focused on that, but I would trust their recommendations. It's also just a very good blog, by the way, to just learn about what's going on in economics and what economists are thinking about. Oliver?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I dropped the link quickly in the chat here for everyone. We are running up against the 90-minute mark here. So just as sort of a one wrap-up question, Karl, before we end the session, I want to ask maybe if there's, let's say, so you mentioned the 2009 white paper. What might be, let's say, you also mentioned the US Constitution, but let's set those two aside. But if there were 3 books right now that you would recommend to high school students, not necessarily even in crypto, let's just say for someone who really wants to understand the world better, what are top 3 books currently that you would recommend to students?
So every year, every winter, I reread Mutiny on the Bounty by Nordhoff and Hall. And every time I read it, I learn something new. It's an amazing story about doing unconventional things. It's a true story. It was reconstructed by Nordhoff and Hall, who were historians, from the actual ship's logs and first officer logs, including Fletcher Christian's own log. And it's a story of a British research ship, science ship, that gets stolen by its first officer. He's able to run away with it because he can read the French maps and journals, and very few people in the British Navy at the time spoke French or could read French. He gets away with pretty much the largest crime in the history of England, stealing a flagged vessel from the Royal Navy and getting away with it. I find a very inspiring story. I think the main character is very interesting, and I think it can encourage you. I find encourages me to think of problems in new ways and to contemplate solving problems in sort of daring ways. So that's number one. I think if you're interested in urban economics, you're interested in how people make decisions, important decisions, like which neighborhood to live in, which school to send their kids to, which job to take. Gary Becker's classic, The Economics of Discrimination, is the book to read. It describes how people interact with markets. It describes how preferences and tastes are relevant to markets. And it describes and accurately predicts, for the most part, 60 years of American history. So I find that book very compelling. And then I think it's always important to read about crisis. People make decisions differently when there's a crisis. People study different things during a crisis. And for this, I really like the work of ethnographer Philippe Bourgeois, a French ethnographer who visited San Francisco at sort of the very start of the AIDS crisis and the very start of the intravenous drug crisis in San Francisco. And I think it's a wonderful history. He was there at the time. He was actually watching the crisis develop. And I think it's a great book to understand how policymakers, politicians, economists, public health officials, how do people react during a crisis? And why is some of that urgency helpful in driving creative solutions? But some of that urgency can be distracting or harmful, and can drive people to adopt policies that are suboptimal. So I think that's very interesting. Many books have been written on the 2008 financial crisis, on the Depression, etc. And some are good and some aren't so good. But I think reading about things like this, the lesser known crises, the welfare reform crisis of 1996, something I read about a lot. The funding crisis for the MTA in New York in 1983 and 1984. Something I read about a lot. The New York subway shut down, paralyzing the city. When you read about these kinds of crises, you appreciate that humans are sometimes in difficult situations, making decisions with incomplete information, and we do our best, but we can do better, and reading history hopefully helps us do better. So hopefully that gives you some more reading. You can follow me on X, twitter.com/Karl Muth. You can follow where I'm speaking, things I'm thinking about, things I've written recently. And have a great weekend.
Yeah, let me just quickly wrap things up here. Quick virtual round of applause yeah, some chat box thank yous would be great for Karl. Thank you once again, Karl, for doing this. I'm sure the students have they have a ton of reading to do. Hopefully they'll do it. It's just for your own edification. But once again, these sorts of opportunities are really just for students to learn a little bit more about the kinds of cool work that you're doing, Karl, the kinds of work that our faculty are doing at CCIR, a chance for you guys to share a little bit with the younger generation. So thank you everyone for taking your time, and thank you once more, Karl, for joining us today.